Well, today I'm going to talk about men's sexual health. And I thought I'd start out with this slide to get everyone's attention. What I want to do is go through the history in America of sexuality for a couple reasons. First of all, it kind of plays a role in where we are today. Secondly, is that I lived through most of this. Not in the 1800s. So, back in the 1800s, the Victorian era, everything was prim and proper. In 1832, Dr. Charles Knowlton was put in prison because he advocated birth control in a book that he wrote, Fruits of Philosophy. This was kind of the start of changing Americans' attitudes about sexuality. In 1873, the Comstock Law, which mandated and prohibited the sending of birth control information through the mail. In the late 1800s, the feminist movement started. So it started way back then. And Margaret Sanger was a nurse in New York City, and she became an outstanding pioneer of family planning. She opened her first clinic in 1916 and then was immediately put in jail. She was in jail for 30 days. This did not slow this woman down. She came back in 1932. She had established 80 clinics throughout the United States. In 1936, the majority of medical schools provided little or no information about contraception. In 1937, the AMA officially endorsed birth control. Lucky for me, my mother had already become pregnant with me. In 1938, the Comstock Law was thrown out. In 1942, 800 birth control clinics were scattered throughout the country. In the late 40s and 50s, women were marrying younger and having kids sooner. These are the baby boomer kids today. In 1953, Hugh Hefner, who is still alive and well, changed everything with his publication of the Playboy. This started the philosophy that rejected any limits on your sexual activity and expression, and it discouraged marriage. In 1960, the FDA approved the pill. In the early 60s, Helen Gurley Brown wrote this book called Sex and the Single Girl, and this really promoted a cavalier lifestyle for women when it comes to their sexuality. It promoted sexual freedom and discouraged marriage. In the mid-60s, when I was in undergraduate school, anti-establishment, Vietnam, war, music, drugs, different modes of dress, sexual freedom. In the late 60s, the hippie movement, total sexual freedom and marital infidelity. In 1969, Woodstock, hair, a much more permissive attitude was beginning to take shape. In 1969, we had the birth of two social movements which live on today, Women's Lib and Gay Lib. In 73, 40 years ago, Roe versus Wade. At the end of the 70s, more than 25% of married women in their late 20s remained childless. At the end of the 70s, herpes, teenage marriages. 1960 to 1980, marriage rates declined by 25%. 1960 to 1980, the number of divorced men and women rose by almost 200%. The divorce rate itself jumped to 90%. During that time, men and women became sexually active earlier in their life. In the 80s, debate about sex was actually polarizing the nation's politics. In 1980 and 81, we had the start of the AIDS epidemic. In 81, 255 deaths. And you can see that it's just gradually gone up. AIDS has killed 30 million people worldwide since it was first recognized and diagnosed in 81. 1.1 million people are currently living with HIV in the United States, and 18% of these people are unaware of this. 50,000 Americans become newly infected with HIV every year, and this number has not really changed over the last decade. We have more than 15,000 people with AIDS will still die this year in the United States. 650,000 Americans have died from AIDS since the disease was first started back in 1969 when we didn't know what it was. From 1990 to present, continued disillusion of sexual liberalization. It's moved, this pendulum has swung back the other way, fortunately. On March 27, 1998, the FDA approved Pfizer's Viagra, and the new blue pill was made available. Which brings me to erectile dysfunction. How'd you like the way I transitioned into that? So how do we assess men's erectile hardness? Measuring hardness, the causes of hardness problems, and correcting hardness problems. This is from Steve Lamb. He believes, which I firmly believe, the strength of a man's erection is a true barometer of his overall health. Erectile dysfunction today in America affects 52% of all men aged 40 to 70 to some degree or another. So it is a significant problem. It's a problem that really has not been addressed very well until recently, when we have all these ads on TV now about Viagra and Cialis, which I think is a good thing. So how do we measure hardness? Well, I think you all remember the stamp test, and that was what I was taught in med school. And that is, you put stamps around your penis when you go to bed at night. And then if you wake up and the stamps are torn, you know that you had an erection during the night and that you've got something going for you. There's a much better way to do this if you want to spend a lot of money, and you can do this in your office. This is called a digital inflection rigidometer. And there it is. And this device is now FDA approved and available worldwide. And it's specifically designed for the diagnosis of erectile dysfunction.